Excellencies, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Janet Siegel, and I am the chairperson of the NGO Committee on Aging New York. On behalf of our committee, I want to welcome you to the 27th anniversary celebration of the International Day of Older Persons, which was organized in partnership with the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the focal point on aging and her staff, and was sponsored by the Permanent Mission of Argentina to the United Nations. We are fortunate today to have several missions as co-sponsors of the International Day of Older Persons, including the Group of Friends of Older Persons, which is comprised of 20 member states, including Argentina, who is our main mission sponsor. These include Bolivia, Brazil, who is here, represented, Chile, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Indonesia, Kenya, Malaysia, Mexico, Panama, Peru, Qatar, Slovenia, South Africa, Trinidad and Tobago, and Uruguay. The Permanent Mission of the United States to the United Nations also is the co-sponsor of this event. We have support for our program today through the generous contributions of Pfizer, AARP, and Ms. Lori Norris in memory of her late husband, Clarence Pearson. The NGO Committee on Aging has been working on behalf of older persons since our formation in 1977, raising world awareness of the opportunities and challenges of global aging. Through the committee's stakeholder group on aging, which participated in the deliberation on sustainable development goals leading to the 2030 agenda, the aging community has been successful in highlighting the need for inclusions of concerns of older persons and for making older persons visible. I would like to take this opportunity to assure everyone here that the NGO Committee on Aging New York will continue to engage in advocacy along with our aging committees in Geneva and Vienna to protect the human rights of older persons worldwide and to create a society for all ages. Today we have a distinguished panel to discuss our theme, which is stepping into the future, tapping the talents and participation of older persons. This 27th anniversary celebration of the United Nations International Day of Older Persons would not be possible without the extraordinary efforts of the UNIDOP co-chairs Sandra Timmerman and Rebecca Siruni. We also acknowledge the tremendous assistance we got from the Focal Point on Aging, Rosemary Lane, and Amal Rafe Amin Lamrabat, and their wonderful teams in the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. I want to particularly thank and single out the Permanent Mission of Argentina to the United Nations for the support they've given us through the years, and the Committee on Aging International Day of Older Persons Planning Subcommittee is responsible in large part for this program. I thank you, and I will now turn over the program to Sandra Timmerman, a co-chair of UNIDOP.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming. I wanted to say that both Rebecca and I are really pleased to see you here today. And Rebecca, of course, is my co-chair. We think this is going to be a really wonderful program for you. So I wanted to talk a bit about the theme of our event today, stepping into the future, tapping the talents and participation of older persons, and why we chose that theme. I think we're so well aware of older people throughout the world who are living in poverty, who are victims of abuse, and who are denied basic human rights. But you know, there's a flip side to that. And we know that people, no matter what their situation or functional ability, have so much to contribute. They're already helping their families, many raising their grandchildren. They're earning money and starting businesses, and they're involved on the local level in community development. So this new way of thinking makes sense to me from a societal perspective. There's so much untapped talent out there, and they could be mobilized for the greater social good. And it also makes sense from an adult development perspective. You know, when we reach age 50, about at that time, our thinking shifts, and we look at the time that's left instead of the infinite time ahead. And that's when we ask ourselves, how can we make a difference? And what do we want to leave the world like? We want it to be a better place for our children, for our grandchildren, and our communities. So stereotypes about age are being broken every day. The potential is there for even greater social change so that we can take advantage of the experience and the talent of the people of all ages, especially older people. And at the same time, we're going to be meeting their innate need to give back to society. So today's program will look at that new future and what new ideas and programs are being introduced in technology and entrepreneurship and civic engagement so that no one is left behind. We look forward to a stimulating conversation. So thank you, and I will turn the podium over to Rebecca Siruni, my co-chair. Rebecca.
Welcome, and thank you for coming to this 27th Annual International Day of Older Persons. Aging presents both formidable challenges and prodigious opportunities. What is certain today is that we must be ready now for the coming boom in aging and all the changes it carries with it. And we must ensure that older people play a central role in preparing for and dealing with that vital universal process by fully participating in their communities and their societies. This celebration of the 2017 International Day of Older Persons focuses on the future of global aging by analyzing three elements: technology, entrepreneurship, and civic engagement, which all strengthen the contributions of older persons to societies around the world. Our program on the theme, Stepping into the Future, Tapping the Talents and Participation of Older Persons, hopes to provide a perspective on where we are now and where we are headed, what we have accomplished, and what needs to be done. To begin our program, we will hear from a group of eminent UN speakers actively supporting the rights of older persons through policies in their respective international organizations. Then Sarah Hertog, Population Affairs Officer for UNDESA, will formally launch the highlights of UNDESA's World Population Aging 2017. Then Mark Friedman, founder and CEO of Encore.org, will present the keynote address entitled A Solution Waiting to Happen. Following the keynote address, Donna Butts, Executive Director of Generations United, will be our moderator, leading a panel discussion of international experts who will share their perspectives and experience in the areas of technology, civic engagement, and entrepreneurship. Today, we are honored to have speakers drawn from around the world. After the panel discussion, we invite you to take part in a question and answer period. Please write down your questions clearly on the index cards provided in your red folders. The cards will be collected, and our moderator will share your questions with the speakers. To close our program, Rosemary Lane, Senior Social Affairs Officer at UNDESA and the UN Focal Point on Aging, and Lydia Dravek, Vice Chair of the General Assembly's 8th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, and human rights expert at the Slovenian Mission to the UN, will share their perspectives on aging issues. Now we're going to turn to Janet Siegel, who will present the UN speakers. Thank you.
It's a great honor for us on the Committee on Aging and all of us to introduce our next speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Rasika, who is the Chef de Cabinet to the President of the 72nd session of the General Assembly, who will make some remarks.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here today with you and to feel the energy and really, I don't feel like that there is anyone who is looking for the future with a fear, but with a perspective, with a prospect that is inside all of us. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's really very interesting and pleasant for me to celebrate together the International Day of Older Persons. I would like to convey greetings on behalf of the President of the General Assembly, who wished to be here today, but he had to travel abroad to meet earlier agreed commitments. I want to thank also and congratulate the NGO Committee on Aging and UNDESA for organizing this event today. And thanks to Argentina and other member states, Argentina in first place, but also other member states for supporting and co-sponsoring this event. There is a story probably that many of you already have, the very similar story that I have of my friend who is the entrepreneur, and he had a company, there was a family company they established in 1978. In 2012, that company, because of some bad relations maybe in the company failed. He was in the early 60s, and you would say, okay, I mean, he will go to retire because it's the age, I mean, when you have to retire. On the contrary, he established a new company producing the liquids for the car industries, and now he has the prosperous company working, I mean, for the half of the car industry in Poland. So there is never late to start the new business. It's only what is inside in our heads and in our minds. The International Day of Older Persons is 27 years old. It may seem young in real terms, but this International Day is much older relative to the majority of international days we now celebrate. So I wish a happy International Day of Older Persons to all. Well, after all, the river of time will bring us all at some point to the age where we may feel a little bit more experienced, but don't worry, it's only the number. The age is still the number, so the optimism will bring us much farther than that. I welcome the release of the 2017 World Population Aging Report prepared by DESA. It is a fact that population societies are aging, due in part to increased longevity, but also to the declining fertility. As such, data and analysis are critical to our ability to respond properly to these demographic trends. The theme for this year reflects an important element: how we can ensure an inclusive approach of older populations to development in their countries. If we are going to harness the full potential of our human resources for the benefit of peace and development, we should enable and encourage greater participation of this important segment of population in the life of societies, to recognize their potential and be better prepared for the day when older persons account for a higher proportion of the population, at least in some countries. If we implement two basic principles, inclusivity and conducive environment to use abilities of all age categories, we will get a clearer picture that older persons are not just statistics or economic burden to the society, that they still can contribute to well-being of all of us. On the lighter note, I don't know if you saw the movie Intern, but I always imagine that with Robert De Niro, and how the dynamism and energy of young can be coupled with wisdom and patience of those who were born a little bit earlier. And that movie also brought me to the thing that it's never late to start. We can be interns, but we can be the leaders in any age. Older people are exactly that, people. Therefore, our goals, policies, and work must duly reflect their challenges, contributions, and rights, both in the present and in the future. The Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging was the first global framework to recognize the contribution of older persons to development of their societies. Older people must be recognized as change agents and active contributors to the work we are undertaking across all dimensions. With the implementation of the SDGs now underway, we can integrate the contributions of older persons who have significant skills and expertise, which we cannot afford to lose. At the same time, older persons are often amongst the vulnerable members of the populations whose specific concerns need to be reflected across the full range of the SDGs. Older persons face discriminations and inequality and are at risk of falling into the poverty. In the area of peace and security, a wisdom that comes with age can have and often has had a crucial contributions to the solving issues. They are often able to play the role of honest peace brokers because of experience, knowledge, and the power of trust they bring to the table. They offer and bring respect within their communities to reinforce and sustain peace and promote conflict prevention. This is applicable both at the national and global levels, just as Nelson Mandela's great initiative, The Elders. The subject of migration will feature prominently in this session, with the global compacts being developed. Millions of people over 60 are affected in various ways by all aspects of migration. In many cases, they are left behind, separated from their families, or lose essential services when they move. They are sometimes left to care for grandchildren when family members emigrate. We need to ensure the protection of their rights and give particular considerations to their challenges and opportunities in this context. Having said that, it goes without saying that we have to apply zero tolerance for any abuse or neglect of needs and rights of anyone, including older people. Their vulnerability may increase by age. To close, let me just emphasize that tapping into the talents of older persons is not an option, but rather a necessity. Let us promote civic involvement, entrepreneurships, and technological innovation in a manner that both safeguards and benefits older persons. I wish you a great health and vibrant and fruitful discussions. Thank you very much for your attention.
It is my pleasure and honor to introduce our next speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Frederico Estrada Mayer, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Mission of Brazil to the United Nations, and he will be speaking on behalf of the Group of Friends of Older Persons. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let me just make a personal note, because I'm happy to be here today, because today my father is turning 92. Oh. So, thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, I have the pleasure to speak on behalf of the following members of the Group of Friends of Older Persons at the United Nations in New York. The group is comprised by Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Indonesia, Kenya, Malaysia, Mexico, Panama, Peru, Qatar, Slovenia, South Africa, Trinidad and Tobago, Uruguay, and my own country, Brazil. Let me begin by thanking the organizers for convening this event in 2017 celebration of the 27th anniversary of the International Day of Older Persons, IDOP. The commemoration of this day was officially recognized by the United Nations in 1990 with the General Assembly Resolution 45/106, which designated October 1st the International Day of Older Persons. We mark this day to remind us of the essential contribution that older persons continue making to the functioning of our society and to provide them the adequate guarantees to fulfill this purpose, particularly fully recognizing their human rights. This year's theme on Stepping to the Future, tapping the talents, contributions, and participation of older persons in society, is perfectly in line with all the efforts and contributions that older persons can make to achieve the 23rd Sustainable Development Agenda and its SDGs around the world. We are aware that the population of older persons is projected to reach 1.4 billion by 2030, an increase that will be the greatest and the most rapid in the developing world. And projections indicate that by 2030, older persons will outnumber youth globally. And furthermore, that by 2050, I hope all of us will be there, they will roughly equal the number of children globally. This scenario poses a key challenge to the development of our societies and emphasizes the urgent need to recognize that greater attention needs to be paid to the specific challenges affecting older persons, including the field of human rights. With the demographic trend, it's undeniable that older persons can make a significant contribution to the social, economic, and sustainable development of their societies, if enabling environment and adequate guarantees are in place. In this sense, it's imperative to fully empower older persons to allow them to effectively make that contribution, becoming not only recipients of special care and social protection, but also active agents and beneficiaries of change. It's further of particular relevance that intergenerational dialogue, solidarity, and coexistence are actively fostered, making our societies truly cohesive. Dear colleagues, we recognize that the international community has already taken some important steps to empower older persons, to promote and protect their rights, to raise awareness of aging issues, and to strengthen national capacities in this area. The adoption of the Madrid International Plan of Action in 2002, the establishment of the open-ended Working Group on Aging by the General Assembly, and the appointment of an independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons by the Human Rights Council have been important steps to strengthening the protection of the human rights of older persons and identifying gaps in protection and how best to address them. However, this is not enough, and we need to take more concrete actions to protect and promote their human rights and their active participation in society. This is key to achieve success in 2030 agenda, an opportunity to reaffirm the commitment reflected in the political declaration adopted in Madrid in 2002 to respond to the opportunities and challenges of population aging in the 21st century and to promote the development of a society of all ages. We believe that sustainable and adequate social and economic policies for older persons can be achieved through our shared efforts. The international community must work together to ensure that well-being of older persons while addressing issues related to their social integration and foster intergenerational partnerships and solidarity. We are committed to allow the full participation of older persons in social, economic, cultural, civil, and political life without any restraints and free from all forms of discrimination and violence, as it will lead to ensure their dignity, empowerment, and their ability to fully and effectively enjoy their human rights and fundamental freedoms, actively participating in their societies and contributing to its development. For the members of our group, it's not enough just to visualize the gaps and challenges that affect the rights of older persons. They need to be empowered into genuine right holders and active beneficiaries and contributors to sustainable development. And it's the responsibility of all member states of the United Nations to provide the necessary space for this transformation. I thank you.
it's an honor and pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Thomas Goss, who's the Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs in UNDESA.
Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished co-chairs, excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to join you on behalf of Mr. Liu, the Undersecretary General and the head of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, as well as other colleagues here in the room, Director Bass, who is here, but I know also the Population Division is well represented, but I know John Wilmoth, who is very much a strong supporter of the whole issue of aging, also would have liked to be here today. So I thank the NGO Committee on Aging and the Permanent Mission of Argentina and the Friends of Older Persons for setting up this important event and for organizing and for bringing the world's attention to the importance of tapping the talents, contributions and participation of older persons in society. This year's theme underscores the link between the contributions of older persons and achieving the goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda and the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. In a way, it connects the future that we need with the talents, the experience, and you said the wisdom, but also the passion of the older persons. And that is a wonderful and really important thing to move forward with. A few weeks ago, the General Assembly commenced its 72nd session, at which world leaders highlighted the need to maintain the momentum in implementing the 2030 Agenda. I especially welcome one of President Lajcak's priorities for this year to come, which is focusing on people striving for peace and a decent life for all on a sustainable planet. Today, as we heard from the Deputy Permanent Representative of Brazil, there are 962 million people aged 60 or over worldwide, a number that is expected to exceed that of youth as well as that of children under 10 by 2030, and which, as we also heard, is expected to double by 2050, reaching nearly 2.1 billion. This global megatrend clearly needs to be factored into the implementation of the 17 development goals, which necessitates the real inclusion of older persons in the process. And I think at this point, I just want to put a plug for all of you who are in this room and who helped to actually design the 2030 Agenda. Because I know that many of you, and I see some of the faces that are recognized here, you were here day in, day out, and you made sure that this shared vision of humanity has your experience and your passion in it. And that is in itself already a proof that the theme of today's celebration is relevant and is important. So thank you for what you did. I believe that that the last 8-10 years were formidable in terms of intergovernmental, international convergence, and at its strongest, it gave us the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Climate Action Agreement. So this is something that you have contributed to and which is so important for future generations. Thank you so much. And the pledge of the 2030 Agenda, to leave no one behind, has special resonance for older persons, who are sometimes among the most vulnerable groups and subject to discrimination based on age. On the other hand, like other age groups, older persons have and continue to make enormous contributions to development efforts. However, to strengthen older persons' meaningful participation to development, it is necessary to remove barriers that exclude and discriminate against them. A key change within and beyond the United Nations must be to raise the profile of aging issues and better integrate the concerns and interests of older persons in efforts to advance the realization of the SDGs. I'm pleased to share with you that this year an informal network of interested entities of the United Nations system has been launched by UNDESA and UNDP. The aim of this network is to discuss and exchange information on aging-related work and identified areas of cooperation and synergies, Current partners include UNFPA, OHCHR, UNRIST, ILO, UN Women, who is also here with, represented by SG Puri, WHO, ESQUA, and others entities are joining as well. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome the panel of experts that is joining us later during this event from Germany, Tanzania, and the United States to showcase cutting-edge research, age-related technological innovations, and models of civic engagement and entrepreneurship of older persons. I thank everyone in this room, and in particular, the older women and men who have joined us today. I thank you for your commitment and for your example. Thank you.
It is my honor and pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Madame Puri, who is the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I'm doubly, and I should say thrice blessed to be here. The NGO Committee on Older Persons is led by 3 women. Also, as a 60+ myself, I like to be in a celebration of the power of the elderly. And third, because what we have been discussing, the mega trends of aging, has a very prominent female face. And UN Women, of course, very strongly supports the cause of the empowerment of elderly women, but also the promotion and protection of their human rights. So, great to be here and joining all the other great speakers before me in congratulating all of you, those who have organized, convened, and who've been working through their lives for this great cause. I would also like to thank, of course, our member states who are friends of the older persons, the Permanent Mission of Argentina and others who are part of this cohort, which recognizes that ageism of any kind, you know, on one side we keep talking about not discriminating against the youth, but also there is this other side of discrimination against the elderly. So I think we are here also to look at that other side of ageism and looking at how we should completely banish that basis of discrimination, just as we continue to fight against discrimination based on gender. We also like to recall the other mega trend that women tend to live longer. Thankfully, in some area, we seem to be prevailing. Especially at advanced ages, making up a significant majority of the older population, and the female share increases with age, apparently. In 2015, women accounted for 54% of the global population aged 60 years or over, and 61% of those aged 80 years or over. So, older women are often the pillars of their families and represent the world's greatest and yet often most overlooked and underappreciated sources of experience, knowledge, skills, and wisdom. And they are also some of the most vulnerable and seen as vulnerable. There are 2 things. They are vulnerable or not, but they are seen as vulnerable. Easily, they can be oppressed. So I think that's something and violence due to the compounded effects of age and gender-based discrimination and other intersectionalities. Disability maybe, poverty maybe, there are other intersectionalities that then compound this vulnerability. Also, older women suffer from higher rates of poverty than older men in both developed and developing countries. That's the other reality. Inequalities in income, access to education, access to full employment and decent work, health and social projection across the life cycle accumulate and expose many women to poverty in old age. However, the specific situation facing older women are often forgotten, and policies have been slow to respond to the rights and needs of older people in general, but older women in particular. The fast aging populations and shifting demographics present both enormous challenges and opportunities, and today's theme of stepping into the future, tapping the talents and participation of older persons, and what Thomas referred to, the connection to Agenda 2030. How can they be beneficiaries, you said, and contributors to the implementation of Agenda 2030 and achievement of its goal? And let us not forget, one of its major goals is SDG 5 on achieving gender equality in this area as well, and empowering all women and girls, and that all includes elderly women. Now, I would like to refer to the three sub-themes that were identified: technology, civic involvement, entrepreneurship, and how they relate to older women. Technology has the capacity to magnify and exacerbate prevalent prejudices and biases exponentially. Unless we carefully mitigate these biases in all forms of technology, and we make people of over 60 technology savvy and technology enabled. And in fact, it can be a huge boon to older people to be able to use the technologies in different areas, including ICT. And there is a negative notion that older individuals are resistant to new trends and technologies must be challenged. A Philips study recently found that a majority of individuals aged 65 or older are comfortable using technology. However, the study found there's a gap between perception and reality, with only 42% of younger people thinking seniors use technology in their daily lives. And I've seen that in my own family, where there is a presumption of my not being such a technophile, when actually I'm much more technophile than is the perception. Therefore, harnessing technological advances to improve the situation of older women is critical. And the link between technology and women's rights is clearly reflected in SDG 5 and on utilizing enabling technology to realize women's and girls' empowerment. The other aspect, I think some of you referred, Ambassador Ruzek, you referred very much to the importance of how women, older men, are great mobilizers of civic involvement. So the issue, but at the same time, if you look at the other side, there is an epidemic of loneliness that older people face. So we really need to address that, and this has vast implications on older persons' health, well-being, and mortality, in addition to placing often unmanageable burdens on young and aged caregivers. The social and economic cost of loneliness includes increased public spending on health services. So I think how we conceive family-based care and you know, the positioning of elderly within the family and not segregation, because that's one, you know, in Asia, for example, we typically look at the elderly as very much a part of the family, and the care they give and they receive is within that context. So you try and mitigate that. But even there, it's changing. Even in other countries and continents, it is changing. So how do you deal with this whole issue of you know, the elderly living within an organic family environment and friends environment that they have been used to? At the same time, civic engagement is key to tackling this challenge and quelling the epidemic of loneliness. And for older women, it can take many forms, from internet use to face-to-face neighborhood participation, which is beneficial to both the aging women and society in many different countries across the world. And I believe in Japan, which is at the forefront of this issue, is using its national post office network to offer routine check-ins for older adults at a minimal cost to families, and there are other programs that can be creatively evolved and distributed and disseminated, and learning can happen across cultures and continents. The third aspect is entrepreneurship, and I have a very dear friend who's 88, and she is, I will even name her Harriet Freelander. She is a real inspiration because she just started another company. She's been an entrepreneur throughout, and she just started launched another travel company this year, and at this age. So I'm in full admiration that she has that risk-taking, that kind of energy at this stage to really. So there is no age bar for entrepreneurship. And I think this is something that we can, because sometimes older women may not be able to go into full-time work, but entrepreneurship is a major avenue that older women can really look at and build on their savings, on the resources, but investing in entrepreneurship also rejuvenates them. But on the other hand, there is an economic disadvantage that they face, which is cumulative and compounded, and after a lifetime of economic disadvantage, older women typically end up with lower incomes and social protection and and pensions, by the way. There's a big pension gap, gender pension gap, and less access to land, housing, other assets that would help them maintain an adequate standard of living. So I think we really need to also look at systematically how can we expand opportunities for older women's entrepreneurship and using, and also how does this whole issue of unpaid care and other work that older women do throughout their lives, of course they do otherwise, but also in older age, how can it be redistributed and compensated? So I want to end by saying that ageism and gender-based discrimination combine to be responsible for neglect of a very rich and invaluable social and economic capital that older women represent, including in their role as caregivers as much as care receivers. Their role in the productive sector as they move on from reproductive care duties is also often under-tapped. Their knowledge, experience, resourcefulness, I want to emphasize these, authority, there is a certain social authority, community authority that they carry, wisdom, and you talked about the peace making and conflict prevention role that they have been playing and can play. Wisdom and social equity as community harmonizers and builders for sustainable development, for peace and security, humanitarian response and resilience building needs to be harnessed, and equally, older women need to be supported and cared for sustainably. And we have to create those ecosystems and find the best ecosystems that can then, for all the service that they have already rendered through their life and their human rights need to be protected and promoted always. I must also mention older women are also very vulnerable. I think I did, but more vulnerable to violence. And we really need to look at that category when we are looking at our larger project of ending violence against women and girls. So our feminist, my feminist hero, Gloria Steinem, once stressed that women may be the one group that grows more radical with age. So I think that radicalism can be a very positive force. Sustainable development is a radical idea, no more, but it was at one time, and we have brought it to a point where it's no longer radical as it's accepted, but I think we really need to tap that resource that we have in terms of radical older women for delivering on sustainable development. And for those more radical, wiser, experienced, and respected older women, we must transform the world and ensure it is there for them too. This is perhaps the most transformative transformation of all times, and it begins with a fundamental policy and attitudinal shift. I think it was the stereotypes were referred to. We see stereotypes on gender, stereotypes on aging. And to reflect the contributions of older women and to enable them to realize their rights and full potential. It is in this way that we must realize that you are never too old to be included. You're never too old to contribute to humanity's biggest projects. This is what I want to tell our older people, but also older women in particular. And it's never too late for action to empower older people, as you've all said, and to support, to come out strongly in support of the human rights, promotion, protection of human rights of older persons. Thank you very much.
I think it's a hard act to follow. You are all wonderful. We really appreciate everything, particularly with your schedules and all your responsibilities. We're very honored to have you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce the formal launch I'm going to introduce Sarah Hertog, who's a Population Affairs Officer in the Population Division of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA. She joined UNDESA 10 years ago to work in the field of population affairs to help build a strong evidence base rooted in demographic science for global policymakers and advocates. Sarah believes that population trends support economic and social development as well as gender equality because they influence the structures of our households, families, labor forces, and societies. Sarah maintains that development policy and programs are more effective when they consider accurate, timely, forward-looking information about the populations that they are trying to help. Among other themes, Sarah has written about population aging, the living arrangements of older persons, adult and maternal mortality, and global disparities in life expectancy. Please welcome Sarah Hertog, who will present highlights from UNDESA's World Population Aging 2017, which offers bold new data about older persons and how they live. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for that kind introduction. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to be here today on behalf of the Population Division to take part in this event marking the International Day of Older Persons and to officially launch our latest highlights report on World Population Aging 2017. This highlights report summarizes many of the key messages from the full report on world population aging that will be released later this year. And those messages are those that have emerged from analyses of two new sets of data from DESA's Population Division. The first is the 2017 revision of the biennial data set called World Population Prospects, and that was released earlier this year. It includes estimates and projections of population by age and sex for the world and its regions and for 201 countries or areas with at least 90,000 inhabitants. The time period covered by the population estimates extends back to 1950, and projections are made through the year 2100. This highlights report draws especially on the estimates and projections of the size of the population aged 60 years or over, that is the number of older persons, as well as estimates and projections on the proportion of older persons in the population, which is a metric that we commonly use to discuss trends in population aging. The second of the Population Division's data sets that's featured in this report is on the household living arrangements of older persons, whether older persons are living alone, with a spouse, with children, or in another household living arrangement. And this highlight summarizes what those data reveal about global trends over recent decades that show households shifting away from intergenerational co-residence. So I'd like to begin by looking at the recent and projected trends in the number of older persons globally. We've heard some of these statistics already. In 2017, there are an estimated 962 million persons aged 60 or over in the world, and the number of older persons has more than doubled since 1980, when there were 382 million globally. Looking to the future, the number of older persons is projected to double again by 2050, when it is expected that there will be 2.1 billion older persons in the world. The chart shown on this slide shows the trends in the number of older persons broken out according to development group, specifically in the regions usually termed more developed, representing Europe, Northern America, as well as Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, shown here by the dark blue area. The number of older persons has grown by about 84% since 1980, and it is expected to see a more modest increase to 2050, growing by about 34% over its 2017 level. By contrast, the growth of the older population in the less developed regions has been considerably more rapid, tripling since 1980, and it is expected to double again by 2050. Today, about 2/3 of the world's older persons live in the developing regions, and in 2050, it is expected that nearly 8 in 10 of the world's older persons will reside in the developing regions. Now, we can get a better sense of the differences across countries and the projected growth of the number of older persons with a series of charts I'll show you next, and these are also shown on page 6 of the highlights report. So each one of the bubbles on this chart represents one of the countries in the more developed regions. Again, those are the countries of Europe, which are shown in dark blue, and Northern America, which are shown in light green on this chart, as well as Australia and New Zealand, shown in pink, and Japan, which is the lone yellow dot on this chart. The size of each of the bubbles corresponds to the projected number of older persons in 2050. The countries are plotted on the x-axis according to the gross national income per capita, with higher income countries positioned to the right. And the height of the bubbles on the graph indicates the projected percentage growth in the number of older persons between 2017 and 2050. So these data are consistent with what I showed you on the previous chart, indicating relatively modest projected growth in the number of older persons in the more developed regions. At the higher levels of growth among this group of countries are Canada, Australia, and Switzerland, with projected growth of around 70 to 80% between 2017 and 2050. And at the lower end of the growth rates are countries like Japan and also several European countries like Bulgaria and Latvia, where fertility rates have been quite low for long enough that successive cohorts of older persons reaching old age are not growing very fast. So now we'll add to this chart the middle-income countries, as well as the high-income countries that are not a part of the more developed region classification. And here you can really see the very rapid growth in the population age 60 or over that some countries are anticipating over the coming decades. In fact, a majority of middle-income countries are expected to see a twofold increase in the number of older persons between 2017 and 2050. And this includes many of the countries with the largest older populations, like China, India, Brazil, and Indonesia. Well over 1/3 of middle-income countries are expected to see the number of older persons triple by 2050, including Mexico, Nigeria, and Malaysia. This rapid growth in the number of older persons is a legacy both of past fertility rates, which were considerably higher than today when the cohorts now approaching older ages were born, and it's also a consequence of improving survival to older ages, which is truly one of humanity's greatest accomplishments. In the Latin American and Caribbean region, those are the countries shown in dark green on this chart, the life expectancy at birth on average is projected to surpass 80 years by 2050. And in Asia, those countries are represented by the yellow bubbles on this chart, life expectancy is projected to reach 78 years by the mid-century. So these data really highlight some of the recent successes in development that have led to longer lives, but they also point to the need to anticipate the demographic changes ahead and to plan proactively with policies that address the needs and potential of older persons. And with that, I'm referring to policies on health, lifelong learning, employment, social insurance, housing, and infrastructure, among others. So lastly to this chart, we'll add the low-income countries. Most of these are located in sub-Saharan Africa. And here I just really want to highlight that these countries that are very constrained in terms of resources with per capita incomes below $1,000 these countries are anticipating some of the fastest growth in the number of older persons between now and 2050. All low-income countries are expecting at least a twofold increase in the number of people aged 60 or over. And in 4 of these countries, that includes Malawi, Rwanda, Uganda, and Zimbabwe, the number of older persons is projected to quadruple by 2050. So advanced planning is especially needed in these countries to ensure that the appropriate measures are in place to prepare for rapidly growing numbers of older persons. Thus far, I've focused on trends in the absolute number of older persons, but when we consider population aging, what we're really talking about is shifts in the population age structure, whereby older persons constitute a growing percentage of the population. To understand changes in age structure, we need to understand not just how the number of older persons is growing, but also how that growth compares to changes in the number of people at other ages. And what we see is that the number of older persons is growing faster than the numbers of people in all other age groups. Compare the trends in the global population aged 60 years or over to the number of children ages 0 to 9, for example. They're shown by the red bars in this chart. In 1980, the 1.1 billion children aged 0 to 9 years substantially outnumbered the 400 million persons aged 60 or over. But the projected number of children is leveling off, and by 2030, older persons are expected to just outnumber children under age 10 globally. The projections also indicate that in 2050, there will be more older persons aged 60 or over than adolescents and youth aged 10 to 24 years, who are represented here by the orange bars. The consequence of the very rapid increase in the number of older persons compared to other age groups can be seen by the rise in the percentage of the total population aged 60 or over. In the world's most aged regions, Europe and Northern America, plotted here in blue and light green, respectively, more than 1 in 5 people in these regions is age 60 or over today, and projections indicate that in 2050, older persons will account for 35% of the population in Europe and 28% in Northern America. The populations of Asia and of Latin America and the Caribbean are comparatively younger than Europe and Northern America, with about 12% of the population aged 60 or over. But these two regions are aging rapidly, and the pace of aging is accelerating, such that by 2050, it is expected that older persons will account for 1 in 4 persons in both of these regions. The population of Africa is aging much more slowly than the other regions, shown here by the red line, and that's despite the rapid increase in the number of older persons occurring in Africa. This is because the total fertility in Africa remains relatively high, and thus the numbers of people at younger ages are growing rapidly as well. So those are some of the key findings that came out of the World Population Prospects data set. And now I'd like to turn to describe for you the findings of a second data set that is featured in this highlights report. And that's the United Nations database on the living arrangements of older persons, 2017. This new data set updates work that was previously published by the Population Division in 2005. And with this new release, we have significantly expanded the number of data sources, countries, and time periods considered. And we've also worked to improve the dissemination tools for the data in a way that we hope will make it a useful reference for researchers and policymakers. We hope that many of you here today will find this resource valuable to your work. The database contains estimates of the percentage of persons aged 60 or over living alone, with a spouse only, with their children, or in another household living arrangement. Due to data limitations, it does not at this time include estimates of the percentage of older persons residing in group quarters, such as nursing institutions. Our analysis has indicated that this represents a fairly small percentage of older persons in most countries, but we will look into including those estimates in future revisions of the database. In building the database, we've analyzed data from 664 data sources representing 143 countries or areas, which together account for 97% of the global population aged 60 or over. And the years associated with the data sources range from 1960 to 2015. This data set was developed by staff of the Population Division in collaboration with Professor Albert Esteve and his colleagues at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. So what did we find? The estimates indicate that globally, approximately 40% of persons aged 60 years or over lived what we refer to here as independently, meaning alone or with a spouse only. And that in both Europe and Northern America, an overwhelming majority, more than 70% of older persons, lived independently around 2010, compared to just 33% of those in Latin America and the Caribbean, 27% in Asia, and 20% in Africa. Across each of the regions, the percentage of older persons living independently was similar for men and women, but there are large gender gaps in the proportions of older persons who live alone. Worldwide, approximately 17% of women aged 60 or over lived alone, compared to 9% of older men. In both Africa and in Europe, older women were more than twice as likely as their male peers to live alone. On the other hand, in Africa, Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean, more than half of older persons co-resided with their children around 2010, while co-residence with children was comparatively rare in both Europe and Northern America at around 20%. Now, differences in living arrangements across countries and regions reflect differences in family size and the availability of kin, as well as differences in the social and cultural norms and preferences surrounding intergenerational co-residence, among other factors. Analyses of trends over time indicate that older persons have become more likely to live independently, whereas co-residence with children has become less common. Globally, the percentage of older persons living independently increased from around 24% circa 1990 to around 37% in 2010, at the same time that the percentage co-residing with their children declined from 65% to 53%. This trend away from living with children and towards living alone or with a spouse only was evident in all regions with the exception of Northern America, where the living arrangements of older persons were essentially unchanged between 1990 and 2010. I'd like to conclude my presentation by calling your attention to a couple of online tools that we've put together to accompany the World Population Aging 2017 report. The first is an interactive database on the living arrangements of older persons that will be made available on the website of the Population Division in the coming weeks. And here, one will be able to explore the estimates of living arrangements for a given country, visualizing the estimates from all of the various data sources and time periods available for that country. The example on the screen right now is for Malawi. The interactive display also enables you to explore the estimates disaggregated by sex and age group, and where possible by urban and rural residents when that information is available. A second tool that is available on the website of the Population Division starting today is the Profiles of Aging Database 2017. And here one can access a 2-page profile for the world, any of the regions or income groups, or any of the 201 countries or areas for which UNDESA produces population estimates and projections disaggregated by age and sex. This example shown here is for Mexico. Through a series of data tables and charts on these profiles, they describe changes in the size and age distribution of the population, as well as trends in the median age, dependency ratios, life expectancy at birth and at older ages, and the household living arrangements of older persons. Lastly, the electronic version of the highlights publication and the Profiles of Aging data tool are available right now on the website of the Population Division, unpopulation.org, under the Aging theme. And later this year, we look forward to having the full report on world population aging, on which this highlights is based, and the Living Arrangements of Older Persons database and report at this same location. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I want to say that we heard it first. This is really a launch for the highlights of this report. So we're really pleased that we had that opportunity. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Mark Friedman, who is founder and CEO of Encore.org. And I wanted to tell you about Encore's grand mission, which is to build a movement to tap the skills and experience of those in midlife and beyond to improve communities and the world. And I have to say, because I've known Mark for a long time, he's really made it a reality. He's the person who helped us understand what social entrepreneurs in the second half of life can do. I won't take time to go through his bio in the program, but I hope you'll read it and you'll see how many accomplishments he's had. I'll mention a few. He's the author of 4 books, and I understand he's suffering through a 5th book now, which I can't wait to read when he finishes it. He received the 2014 Social Entrepreneur of the Year Award by the World Economic Forum, and he co-founded the Experience Corps. I've heard Mark speak many times. He's always inspiring. He gives us so much to think about. And he just told me that he returned from Singapore. So I'm hoping he will tell us about that experience. So Mark, let me turn the podium over to you.
Thank you so much, Sandy, for that reminder about suffering through this book, which I am very much suffering through. The first book I wrote, I was so late on that it was for sale on Amazon before I had started writing it. And in a fit of jet lag and anxiety, I actually ordered the book in hopes that maybe it was just a bad dream, but it did not arrive. It's such an honor to be part of the International Day of Older Persons and here at the UN, and I'm so grateful. And I'm also grateful for the stepping into the future theme, because I think that is exactly the right theme. But it raises a question as well, which is the question of which future. William Gibson, the science fiction writer, says the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And to get verification of Gibson's insight, you merely need to come to New York this week, because today we're talking about one future, but if you head to Chelsea tomorrow, all day the New Yorker's convening their 2017 Tech Fest, and one of the major themes of the Tech Fest this year is Silicon Valley and the technology industry's efforts to conquer mortality, to cheat death. And it's based on an article in the New Yorker a few months ago about this Silicon Valley effort to live forever. And it's really an extraordinary innovation undertaking with untold resources behind it. Google formed a company called Calico a few years ago with AbbVie, the pharmaceutical company, and it poured billions of dollars into it with this goal of finding the fountain of youth. There's a $2 million Palo Alto longevity prize focused on extreme life extension. Peter Diamandis, the X-Prize founder, and Craig Venter of genome sequencing fame have started something called Human Longevity. I could go on and on. Larry Ellison has been one of the main backers of this. In an interview a few years ago, Ellison said he never really thought much of death. To which Michael Kinsley, the wonderful writer, said, you know, it really doesn't matter what Larry Ellison thinks of death. What's much more important is what death thinks of Larry Ellison. But I won't belabor that, because I think that they're solving the wrong problem in the wrong way, and in a way that is going to actually create a raft of problems, beginning with massive overpopulation, should they succeed. But I want to focus on solving the right problem, and to do that, I'll just go back in time half a century, a little more than that, to John F. Kennedy's most significant speech on aging. He got up in 1961, and along with many other wise things about the coming longevity revolution, he said that we'd added years to life. Now is the time to add life to those years. And since that time, we've added, I think, a month a year to the American lifespan. And, you know, Silicon Valley wants to add a decade a year. But what about the life to years part? And by that, I mean life to years, not just in the enjoyment, personal meaning vein, but in the way that this convening has defined it, which is contributions that are not only personally meaningful, but that mean something beyond ourselves to the community. Contributions that are not only meaningful in the present, but contribute to the life beyond our years. And I think that's not only the right problem to solve, but it's the right opportunity to seize. My mentor, a guy by the name of John Gardner, who was Lyndon Johnson's HEW secretary and who implemented Medicare and the Older Americans Act, had a wonderful expression during the battles over Medicare. He said, America today faces breathtaking opportunities disguised as unsolvable problems. And certainly, as we've heard already, and Sarah's demographic projections show that that's a global opportunity. But it rests, I think, on taking a page from all these efforts that are happening in technology world, which is to focus on the needed innovations, the cultural and social innovations that can help us keep pace with these extraordinary gains through medicine and public health, and other measures that we've made on extending the lifespan, on longevity. And I think that's really where we need to focus our attention. And actually, it's a familiar problem in my country here in the US. A little after World War II, the state of older people was despairing in this country. Walter Reuther, the great UAW leader, got up in front of his union and he described retirees as too old to work, too young to die. Living in this state of despair, essentially an anteroom to the great beyond. A few years later, the urbanist Lewis Mumford said, "At no point in any society had any group been so rejected as older people today." And into that void swooped a spectacular group of entrepreneurs. My favorite is a guy by the name of Del Webb, who did two things. As a cultural innovator, he coined the phrase the golden years. And he turned later life from this dreaded period that nobody wanted to think about, rocking aimlessly on the porch, into a destination that people scrambled to get to as early as possible. This notion of graying as playing, a second youth, a chance to get a well-deserved rest, but also to have fun again. And he built whole communities built around that idea, under the name Sun City, built on golf courses in the desert. And Webb's genius captured the zeitgeist of the day. When Sun City opened just a year before JFK gave that speech, on the first day, 100,000 older people showed up. There was a traffic jam for 12 miles leading into the entrance of all these older people who felt there was no place for them in the larger society, so they wanted to go to these microcosms, which were segregated by age, because the essential idea of having a second youth was predicated on the idea of there not being any actual youth there. If everybody was old, nobody was old. And in fact, to this day, Sun City, the original, has 70,000 people living in it. There are age police who roam the grounds trying to ferret out that human contraband, also known as children. They follow school buses around with, and so obviously, again, to return to Sarah's numbers and the numbers we heard today, that vision was designed for a time when people could expect to live 70 at the most in a place like the United States, where there was going to be a brief period at the end of life to have a good time. It wasn't designed for a period that could be as long as midlife in duration, and it certainly wasn't designed for a world where there are more older people than younger people. And so we have to go back to the drawing board. We have to rethink what the future is going to look like and how we're going to get there. And I want to argue that the two ways we need to do that to start are through thinking in new ways, through cultural innovation, and creating entirely new institutions, social innovations, as it served us in the past. And I think the intense pressure to do that is all the greater as these gains in longevity continue, because no matter whether people like me criticize what's happening in Silicon Valley, it's going to keep happening. And a lot of money and resources are going to go into it, and longevity is likely to continue growing. But how do we rise to this innovation challenge to make the most of all of these extra years? And I want to argue that the starting place for doing that is exactly the opposite one that those folks in Chelsea tomorrow are going to be talking about. It's not from trying to cheat death, to run away from the finiteness of life, to find that elusive fountain of youth. It's actually to embrace mortality. I think that's the most important insight at all, and it's one that no less a tech titan than Steve Jobs advised us to do when he got up in front of Stanford graduates in 2005, having just barely escaped his own mortality the first time, although just a little ways from when he would actually pass away. And he described death as the single best invention of life. The single best invention of life. And part of the reason it sweeps out the old to make way for the new. And he informed the Stanford grads that they would soon be the old that would be swept away. But most of all, because it teaches us what matters most, what's most important in life. And it turns out now there's actually a significant body of research that shows that Jobs was right, not just from theological writings, but actually from human development. Laura Carstensen, who runs the Longevity Center at Stanford, has done for years studies of people of all ages, and she varies the question of time left to live. Sandy talked earlier about that driver to purpose, the notion that there are fewer years ahead than behind. And so if you tell people that they have fewer years ahead than behind, and you compress those years, what do they focus on? They don't go out and learn a new language. They focus on people, on relationship, on love. And that's probably the most profound insight that this endpoint in life has to teach us, which is that love matters most, that people matter most. And as it turns out, also the longest, most significant longitudinal study of human development and happiness, the Harvard study of adult development, has come to the exact same conclusion. There's a wonderful TED talk by the current director in which he says essentially that relationships are the key to life, full stop. And the previous director of that study, George Valent, has gone further. What he found is that it's not just these all-important horizontal peer relationships that are important to happiness, but the gold standard are relationships that flow down the generational train that were described by Erik Erikson, the great psychologist, as generativity. Erikson said that the hallmark of successful development in later life could be encapsulated in the phrase, "I am what survives of me." And that's what Valent found. Older people who connect down the generational train, they mentor, they support young people, are engaged in the lives of the next generation, are 3 times as likely to be happy as those who fail to do so. And he's kind of a poet, Valent, and he has a wonderful way of encapsulating things that gets to their essence. And he says, biology flows downhill. And what a great counterexample to this idea of trying to hang on to our youth in later life, essentially swimming upstream, an ultimately fruitless task. Biology flows downhill. And I think in our work at Encore, those insights are ones that we've heard over and over again from real people in projects, beginning with the Experience Corps, which we developed along with Dr. Linda Fried, the dean of the Mailman School at Columbia, to get people over the age of 50 involved with young people in schools to try to solve problems of reading and success in life by these young people. And one of the surprises of that program is that nobody ever left. When we looked back after the first decade of Experience Corps, what struck us is that so many of the Experience Corps members were still Experience Corps members. And when you asked them about it, they never set out to have a second act focused on the greater good. They just wanted to go help some kids in a school, usually oftentimes the school that they themselves attended. 85% of the Experience Corps members, African American, Latino, working in schools in low-income neighborhoods. And we realized that what they were doing in a lot of ways paralleled what many famous people were doing. Jimmy Carter, his post-presidential second act. We see it with Bill Gates, focused on philanthropy in his years beyond Microsoft. And we tried to think about this whole and came up with the idea of an encore career, a second act at the intersection of passion, purpose, and a paycheck, because the Experience Corps members receive stipends. And in recent years, we've done research which shows that it's not just Bill Gates and Jimmy Carter and the 2,000 odd people who were in Experience Corps, now part of AARP, but there are actually 4.1 million people already in Encore careers. I'm sorry, I think it's 4.5 million people already in Encore careers. Another 21 million who say it's top priority to use all of their accumulated experience in ways that contribute to the greater good. And so you add that up, this is just in the United States, 25 million people. These Encore careers last about a decade in duration. That's 250 million years of human and social capital that could be dedicated to challenges in areas like education, health, human services, the environment. Talk about a solution waiting to happen, but all too often it's waiting to happen. And why? What's the barrier? I think of, enviously of those 100,000 people streaming into Sun City half a century ago. And I think that one of the problems is that we've yet to create the pathways to purpose that so many people need. So it's very much an improvisation to get from aspiration to action. But I'm heartened in recent years by the development of a whole set of new institutional forms that I think have the seeds of solving the social innovation gap that currently exists. In the United States, there's been a new type of education that's been developed over the last decade. It started with Harvard, which created the Advanced Leadership Initiative for people who wanted to move essentially from success to significance. Stanford has done their own version, the Distinguished Careers Institute. Obviously, these are very elite undertakings. Students come from all over the globe. But in 2 weeks, I'm going to be at the University of Minnesota, which is doing the first state university version at a much, much lower cost for people essentially to have a gap year for grown-ups, to go back to school, not just to stimulate their mind or to find something to do, but to launch a whole new phase of life, a period that doesn't even have a name yet, but in many ways is like the creation of adolescence 100 years ago. We had all these children and adults, but there was a proliferation of young people who didn't fit into either category, so we created adolescence. Now, in 2017, there's a similar proliferation of people who aren't in old age. They're not frail. They're not primarily dependent on services, but they're not in midlife either. They're essentially in a new stage of life that has no name, that some have described as a season in search of a purpose. So this effort at the University of Minnesota, like many community college efforts here in the US at an even lower price point, are trying to help people navigate their way into this period, find what their next role will be, their encore career, but also in many ways go through the kind of developmental shift that young people go through when they go off to higher education, where they shift from being adolescents to in a more mature phase. The chef de cabinet mentioned the movie The Intern, with Robert De Niro playing a 70-year-old intern in a Brooklyn tech startup. We have a real-world version of that here in America that we've helped launch an Encore called the Encore Fellowships Program. It's a one-year, half-time internship where people don't reinvent themselves, really. They take their experience and know-how from their previous work and adapt it to work at an NGO. And the idea isn't just doing a year of service, but to launch this whole new chapter in their contributing life. And what's so interesting about it is that this is a case of life imitating art, because those of you who saw the Intern movie know that Robert De Niro ends up mentoring the Anne Hathaway character. We never thought of that as an explicit goal of the program, but it happens everywhere when we put these De Niro-esque characters in NGOs. This past year, we had 800 Encore Fellows around the country. Intel has made it a corporate HR policy that every retirement-eligible Intel employee in the United States who wants to do one of these fellowships and is placed in an organization can do so. They cover the cost of the internship. They cover health benefits for, in part. I believe they put $30 or $40 million into the program this past year, and it's an example of how the corporate sector can contribute to this new vision of aging and helping people move not just from an idea, but to reality. I don't want to overemphasize what's happening here in the US, because I'm really heartened and inspired by so many global developments and the possibility, I think for the first time since I've been doing this work over 3 decades, of a global community of innovators who are working together to solve the life to years challenge. I just came back, as Sandy mentioned, from a whirlwind week around the world that started in Singapore, where, as many of you know, the government has launched a $3 billion plan over the coming decades to be the envy of aging in the world. And it's a beautiful, common sense effort that focuses very heavily on the ideas that we're talking about today. One is a 50,000 person volunteer corps of older people that's going to be marshaled over the next 5 years. There's the notion of a kampong for all ages, kampong being the Malay word for village, trying to bring the generations together in myriad common sense ways, like co-locating all new senior centers and childcare facilities that are built. All residential facilities for older people will incorporate intergenerational playgrounds and other efforts that go beyond program to proximity, to bring older and younger together in each other's path on a daily basis. There's, I believe, 100 or 200 million Singaporean dollar innovation fund to promote new ideas. And it's great to see this kind of grand plan unfold. And Singapore is Singapore. Not every country is going to be able to do that. There's nothing akin to that here in the United States. But then I went to the UK right from there, where a sort of opposite development is happening, where Lucy Kellaway, a beloved columnist for over 30 years at the Financial Times, last July announced to her readers, inspired in part by her daughter who had become a teacher, that a year from then she was no longer going to be writing columns, but that she was going to be teaching math in a low-income school in London. And she did something more. She challenged her readers to quit their jobs and join her in this Pied Piper-like way. 1,000 people have signed up for what is called Now Teach. They originally, I think, had maybe a couple dozen slots. They're now up to 4 dozen slots, but that's still, it's something like 20 people for every slot. Just to start. And it's a phenomenon that's akin to what we saw here in the US when Teach for America was formed. And what I love about this effort is that Lucy Kellaway co-created it with a young social entrepreneur. It's a beautiful kind of intern movie-like model of an older and younger innovator coming together, bringing the best of experience and innovation. What I'm also seeing is some of the most talented social entrepreneurs in the world, as they move into their 50s and 60s, turning their attention to new roles for older people, new ways of caring for the older population. Mitch Besser is a great example, the co-founder of Mothers to Mothers in South Africa. After vast success with Mothers to Mothers, now in his own 60s, has created Age Wells, which is a peer support model in which both more affluent and less affluent older adults in South Africa are trained to provide non-medical support for frail elders in their community. And it goes back to the earlier comment about the extraordinary epidemic of loneliness. In the current issue of Harvard Business Review, the former Surgeon General has a piece in the Big Idea section, and in it he talks about this epidemic of loneliness and how we can begin to conquer it. Being socially isolated is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of adverse health effects, just to give you a glimpse of how prominent this problem is. And so I hope more talented innovators like Mitch will move into this arena, because there has not only been an innovation gap, there's been an innovators gap. You know, at Encore, we oftentimes will go to the Schwab World Economic Forum events for social innovators or efforts from Ashoka or Skoll, and there are very, very few people who are working on solutions to aging, to the problems of aging, as well as ways to unlock the opportunity of aging. Before I close, I do want to just highlight something that was also enunciated earlier, which is it's not just younger people doing things or people in midlife creating innovations to improve the quality of life and enhance the contribution of older adults. Already, vast numbers of older adults are rolling up their sleeves and just doing it. They're not waiting for an engraved invitation or for some younger person to pave the way. And at Encore, we've seen that in spectacular fashion over the past decade through the Purpose Prize. 11 years ago, we launched this prize for social innovators over the age of 60. And the first year, we were going to give out 5 prizes. We'd hope we'd have enough applicants to give out the 5 prizes. And actually, a few days before the applications were do, we only had 100 or so, and I was getting quite nervous, but it turns out older people are like me. They wait till the last minute to do everything. That first year, we had 1,200 nominations. Over the last decade, we had 10,000. We had to create a runner-up award just to honor the top 5%. We had all these MacArthur Genius Award winners who weren't even making it. You know, it was really a stunning illustration of the kinds of innovations that are happening everywhere by older people who are leveraging their experience to change the world. And I think that's where I'll close to say that right in front of us, hidden in plain sight, is this opportunity to turn the supposed paradox of all this longevity, all of these older people who may be benefiting themselves but at the expense of others, into the payoff that it has so much potential to be. And again, to harken back to the opening remarks, I keep thinking of the women's movement. This is so reminiscent of what the windfall of talent that became available after women moved into new roles. And it's no surprise that Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan and my board member Suzanne Braun-Levine, the founding editor of Ms., have all written about aging because it's a familiar challenge to them, and it's a challenge that's already been surmounted. I love the movie, The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. I suspect many of the people in this room saw that. Probably few of you watched the sequel, in which Maggie Smith ends up mentoring Dev Patel, and they form a great intergenerational bond that leads the Marigold Hotel to great success. But in the first movie, at the very beginning, when the retirees show up, the woman played by Penelope Wilton is appalled at how ramshackle the Marigold Hotel is. And she accosts Dev Patel, who's playing the owner, and says, "Why doesn't this look anything like the Photoshop brochure I sunk my entire life savings into?" And he said, you know, he tries to calm her down. He says, "Well, here in India, we have an expression, everything works out in the end. So if it hasn't worked out, it's not yet the end." And I think, you know, the optimistic side of me says that that's probably true of everything we're talking about today. This is going to work out in the end, but the end is not soon enough. The future is not going to wait. There are so many urgent and pressing problems that require this army of human and social capital right now. Maggie Kuhn, the founder of the Grey Panthers, that is a wonderful expression. We don't have a single person to waste. And if that was true and Maggie Kuhn said it, it's exponentially more true today. So I urge all of you to help foment this revolution of social and cultural innovation that can solve these problems right now, not in the end, and to eschew the notion of hanging on to our youth as individuals. Rather than trying to be young, we need to be there for those who actually are. Because in the words of the Greek proverb, society grows great when older people plant trees under whose shade they shall never sit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and I can see we don't have any time to waste. So I hope we all go forth and really step into the future, but quickly. Thank you so much for a very inspiring talk. And now I'm very happy to introduce Donna Butts, whom I've also known professionally for many years. You know, some of you saw in the original program another name of a moderator, and unfortunately he was unable to be with us today. But we are very pleased that Donna is now in this role. And in fact, it couldn't be more fortunate for us because Donna is recognized internationally for her commitment to intergenerational collaboration, and her work is really in harmony with today's theme of tapping the talents of older people. But I want to add a separate element to that, which is not only older people, but all generations. And I think you've been hearing this theme today about how we are all in this together. And so, Donna, we're very pleased to have you here. Donna has been in the field of intergenerational programming for 40 years, believe it or not, and has really been instrumental in the last 20 years with Generations United, where she is executive director in putting these issues in the front of the general public all over the world, and also professionals as well. So her bio, again, is in the program. I don't want to read too many of her accomplishments. I do want to say that she's been named as one of the most top influential nonprofit organizations and leaders in the USA. And she's familiar with the UN. Some of you may have seen her here before. She serves on 4 UN expert panels on intergenerational and family issues, and she was the recipient of the Eisner Prize. So Donna will introduce our panel and then lead an interactive dialogue. Hopefully we'll have a little time for questions. So Donna, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sandy. I wanted to be sure to say thank you to Sandy, to Rebecca, to Janet, and the entire aging subcommittee, or aging committee, for all of the work that went into today, and to our inspiring speakers so far, and to the distinguished panel that you're about to hear from. But I also wanted to say thank you to such a distinguished audience. Many of you toil here at the UN regularly. You represent your countries, your organizations, and your causes, and you often do so with little thanks. You work to improve the lives of older people every day around the globe. So I want to say thank you. You understand the importance of engaging the strengths of all generations, and that each generation has value. And in particular, our bookend generations, our young and our old, that really hold our civil societies together, that are critical to the strengths of our countries and our world. It's an esteemed panel I get to moderate today. They have all worked diligently to help shift the conversation about aging from one of burden to one of benefit, and they're going to be talking about that today and what they each contribute. The theme, as you've been told, is stepping into the future, tapping the talents, contributions, and participation of older people, older persons in society. And not just society in general, but in our families, in our communities, and our villages. I was reminded of that yesterday when I was in a session with an executive from Nestle's, and he was talking about their new family-friendly policies, and speaking very proudly of them, as he should have, because he talked about new parents, whether adopted or biologically. And I had to ask him the question, though. I said, I think that's absolutely wonderful, but does the policy include older adults who are stepping in to care for their children? Grandparents raising grandchildren, aunts and uncles. And I could tell that he didn't understand what I was saying, because he said, well, we've thought about elder care, but we haven't gotten there yet. So it goes back to that difficulty people have of realizing the contribution, the value that older adults contribute. They're not only the recipients of care, they're so often the givers of care. So today the panel is going to touch on the 3 topics: technology, entrepreneurship, and civic involvement. The panelists are fantastic. They're going to be joined today, as you know, by Mark and Sarah, who have already spoken. I'm not going to take time to read their bios. They are in your packet. Please do be sure to take the time, though, to read them. And along with what I was thinking as I was looking at them, think about their great accomplishments to date, but what they're going to be doing for many years to come, because we're all going to be in this work for quite some time to come. So first, we're going to hear from Frank Lehazen, who is the general manager of MedCom International in Germany, and he's going to address technology. So Frank?
Thank you. I'd like to talk about our activities, what we call Silver Innovation in Germany. But first, I have to show you some pictures and give you some information about Germany that you get the right context. So first and foremost, Germany is a beautiful country in the middle of Europe, a very good place to live. But we also have a very strong aging effect. So we have a lot of places and squares where you have walker frame jams and no strollers anymore, because when it comes to the definition of Moody's Investor Service, we are super aged, which means we have more than 20% of our population 65 years and older. So we're the second oldest country in the world. And we also have the high age dependency rate, which you can see is the second highest in the world after Japan. So there are some challenges ahead, but I think we're in a good shape. We have a good social insurance system, so I'm not worried about these things. But still, we have an age perception which is tended negative. So when you hear a lot of people, everybody wants to live long, nobody wants to get old, because old people are sick, they are poor, they are not digital, and they're all looking the same. So we have a lot of stereotypes in Germany called the beige generation, so nobody really cares. But things change, thanks God. For example, a lot of NGOs discover that they have a great volunteering potential, as Mark pointed out. So even in Germany, we have a lot of volunteers, 55 plus, doing a lot of work. And they also go to vote. So we just got our national election 2 weeks ago, and the age group went to vote at least 75%. So it's also very important for the parties. And last but not least, and this is where we come in as a consultant, industry finds out by surprise that this age group has the most and the massive buying power of $363 billion. So what happened at this time is we often get asked for workshops to consult companies, and they look like that. They have no clue. They look about the numbers and say, yeah, that's a market, we get rich. And what do? They talk about seniors and not with seniors. And that is one thing what we have a lot in our consultancy. And in 2008, I was asked to be a speaker in Tokyo, in Japan, in a silver market conference. Now it's called Longevity Economy. And a lot of people are very excited about the aging suit. I guess a lot of you know it. So you put on the suit and you feel old. And there was another friend from Germany, from my hometown. So we were neighbors, we met in Tokyo. And he's one of the prestige professors in Germany at the Tech University of Aachen on innovation management. And we discussed this thing, and we all agreed that we have to enable seniors to co-design products and services. We don't have to guess. We have to ask them to get a good product. So we teamed up with an NGO called German Seniors League. It's a bit like AARP, not in size, of course, but it's also working for the seniors in Germany. And we all agreed that seniors are expert at their own affairs at the best. Nobody can know better what a senior needs as seniors themselves. So we joined forces and say we don't go for the fake senior, we go to tap the talent. And therefore we applied for a research grant, and as Frank said, at this time, 2008, there were less to no academic research on the innovation potential of older people. So we got a grant, started our project called Open ISER 2010, and I could tell you a lot of this project. If you're interested in it, we have a lot of papers we share, it's not a problem. Key question, or the key aim, was to develop an open innovation platform, a website where generations can work on issues for senior persons. And from academic side, we also want to prove that elderly have the skills to be innovative, and they want to innovate, the motivation. We want to really look at what they call in innovation management lead users, aged lead users. And we also want to set an infrastructure and also convince the industry. To keep it short, we succeed in all these fields, and I have an example with me, or two. The first thing we started was 2010, so it was 2 years after the iPhone came up. It was an online platform, as we want to establish technology in this field. And we asked people to share their ideas how we can make mobile communication easier for seniors. We launched this website, and the first response we get was this letter from a local senior officer writing us a letter, not an email, saying, thank you that you ask us to work on products and services. Some young engineers do something good, not too good, and we have to deal with it, but now we can participate. When we developed the website, we were discussing, do we need a pen and pencil approach? Do we really need the analog way? And we say, yes, we don't want to discriminate people who don't use the web. But out of more than 250 ideas, 2 came in by paper. for two reasons. If there's a senior and wants to participate, he knows somebody who knows how the internet works, kid, grandkid, or even better, they team up. We had a lot of co-creation with the senior groups who met and really co-create on the scene and bring up ideas which they created in the group. And last but not least, the press take it very good. So we had a very good media coverage and we could really build awareness of the innovation potential of German seniors. We won 4 of these contests in the research period. One famous one was on walker frames. So it's a kind of Pimp My Ride edition for Zimmermans. It was about safety features, it was about design, it was about infrastructure, and we were very proud and still are. We got awarded for the best co-creation in the non-profit world from the PDMA, the Product Development and Management Association, which was saying that we destigmatize age. That was very important for us because we show that seniors have potential we can tap in. And we also did it on a non-profit way. So this is an idea challenge we launched about pedestrian safety. So as you might know, seniors are very vulnerable when they walk around the city and communities. We ask everybody from seniors to policemen to grandkids, what could we do to enhance senior safety? And we give it to city planners and other people who are involved in this planning and thinking about what might be good. So we got the insights from the seniors themselves. So when you go for this kind of technique, you have a triple win. So first of all, the senior appreciation. They can share their knowledge. They have an interaction, they have social inclusion. I just can echo Mark, they have the option to help others. We did a lot of research effort into why these people participate. We did a lot of message framing and to help others in the same age group not to struggle with any issues. That was a key driver. For the provider, if it is a company or a city or whatever, you got a better fit to the market because the people you want to support and serve, you get your insights. You have a higher success rate and quite interesting for business people, you reduce your cost of research and development. And for all of us, it's destigmatization. I think we have a better age perception. We have an intergenerational success because we work together and we're tapping the talents. They are willing to share their knowledge to get a better future for themselves and for the next generations. It's no question. So we could prove experience create ideas, and I would say let's innovate together. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Edward Rogoff, who is the Dean at LIU Brooklyn School of Business, Public Administration, and Information Sciences here in the U.S. And Dr. Rogoff is going to concentrate on entrepreneurship.
Thank you very much. I'm a member of the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor research team. Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, or GEM, is a study that was started about 20 years ago by Babson College and London Business School. And we do annual surveys across the world with local teams that represent about 85% of the world's GDP of entrepreneurs. And I say with all humility, it's by far the best study of entrepreneurs that's done. Very difficult to capture entrepreneurs from regular data sources like the census in the US. So I'm going to give you, we just published a report on senior entrepreneurship around the world. We took 1.5 million surveys collected over the last 10 years. You can see the whole report at gemconsortium.org and go to the reports section. And then you can also look at the reports for any country that you're interested in and many other special topics reports. One of the things we've learned is over the years is that there are two fundamental types of entrepreneurs. There are necessity-driven and opportunity-driven entrepreneurs, and the differences in those are profound. So opportunity-driven is like Ray Kroc. He was a 55-year-old salesman who visited a store that sold hamburgers, who went, wow, this is a fantastic opportunity. He put together a deal, he bought it, he created McDonald's, and he's one of the most successful senior entrepreneurs of all time. But it started with, he had options, he had a job, he didn't have to do this to make a living, He perceived an opportunity, he took advantage of it. The alternative is someone like a client we had at our entrepreneurship center, a guy who I'm just going to say his name is Stu. Stu worked for retailers all his life. He was about 60 years old. He lost his job. He couldn't figure out what else to do. He needed to work. He didn't have huge savings. And he had to come up with a plan. And the first part of his plan was getting a job. And that didn't work. Partially because the industry he was in wasn't good, partially because he was too old, partially because people were prejudiced against him and thought, what does this guy know about technology? That's where retail is going. So he reinvented himself. Out of necessity, he reinvented himself. And the business that he came up with was actually a tech business where he collected data and he distributed it throughout the industry. He does newsletters and he does consulting, and he's become very successful. And he was driven by necessity. So when we talk about entrepreneurs, and I'm going to give you some examples of data, overall data that we've collected, keep these distinctions in mind. So globally, what can I tell you about senior entrepreneurs or older entrepreneurs? I don't know what to call them. If you look at our report, you'll see we end up calling them both. So number one, the prevalence of business ownership among seniors across the world is the same as it is for middle-aged populations. So there's no drop-off in the number of people who own businesses as they get old. Senior entrepreneurs across the world tend to actually be more risk-taking than younger entrepreneurs. They tend to have weaker networks because they've sort of lived their lives, generally speaking, in less interaction with other people. But basically, across the world and in the U.S., and I'll give you some U.S. numbers in a second, it's already done. So entrepreneurship among older populations is already here. They've beaten us to the punch on this. So in the United States, for example, which is the data I know best, about 11% of Americans own businesses. So if you take a look at people 55 to 64, 7.7% of them own businesses. However, if you kind of correct the data to take a look at those people who have not completely left the workforce. So some people really retire, right? They just say, I've had it, I'm finished, I don't want to work anymore in any shape or form, and they say, I'm done. If you take those people out, 11.8% of the balance own their own businesses. Among people 65 plus, the corrected number is 18.4% own businesses. So in the United States, the older you are, the more likely you are to be an entrepreneur. In the United States, the older you are, the more likely you are to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I find this to be astounding. Half of businesses in the United States are owned by people over 50. 70% of 50-plus entrepreneurial ventures started by people over 50 last more than 3 years, while only 28% of businesses started by people under 50 last 3 years. So, what do we know? We know that entrepreneurship is basically supported by age. Entrepreneurs who are older have more education, they have more experience, they have more knowledge, they have greater financial capabilities. They're perfectly comfortable doing tech businesses. In fact, tech businesses reduce the barriers to getting into business. You know, it used to be you needed to rent an office, you needed to hire a staff, you needed the bookkeeper, blah, blah, blah. Now you just have a computer, you set up your business in the corner of your bedroom, and you're an entrepreneur. And you can outsource everything from handling the distribution of your product to having your bills paid. So, and the other thing, I'll just end on this, is that entrepreneurship is a team sport. It's a team sport for people of all ages. People don't do it alone. Bill Gates started Microsoft with his father. Jeff Bezos started Amazon with support from his parents. Steve Jobs started his business with his father. It's very common to be a family business. It's very common to be a team sport. And this really raises the issue for senior entrepreneurs about teaming up with people who are younger, because they do have different sets of skills, and also because it sort of builds in a succession plan for the business. So my message to you is, this is already here. Let's figure out how we're going to support this group the best way that we can. Let's be cognizant of the fact that some people are doing this because they can afford to take an opportunity and a risk, and other people are doing it because they have to, and those two populations need to be dealt with separately. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. I'd like to remind people that in your package you have a card, and if you have any questions for the panel, for Mark, for Sarah, this would be a good time to start writing those down, thinking about the questions you want to ask, and hold them up, and someone will be around to pick those up. So this is the way that we'll be asking questions, so be sure to use your cards. So next, it's my privilege to introduce Livingstone Bartholomew Biaqueso. He is the executive director of the NGO Sawaka, which is in Tanzania, and they are an affiliated with HelpAge, but what they stand for is support the elders in Tanzania. So, Livingstone?
Thank you, Madam. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to participate in this remarkable event. As already introduced, my name is... Thank you. As I've already been introduced, my name is Livingstone Bartholomew Biaqueso. I'm coming from Tanzania, and I work as a director of an organization called Sawaka. Sawaka stands for HelpAge Tanzania, or Support the Aged in Tanzania. It's an affiliate member to HelpAge International, and a member to African Social Protection Platform. Our organization focuses on lobbying and advocacy for the rights of older people, particularly social protection. We also focus on health education and HIV impact mitigation. We are focusing on emergency and relief support to elderly people and their dependents. And we also focus on households' economic strengthening of older people, of which we always engage older people with income generation activities. We are mobilizing older people to form self-help groups and provide them with the seed capital to start income generation activities to sustain their life. The situation of older people in Tanzania is that Tanzania has more than 2.5 million people over the age of 65, which forms 5.6% of the total population of Tanzanian people. Most of the older people they are poor, they are suffering from chronic illness and disabilities, and experience social exclusion, rights abuse, and discrimination. But although there have been a growing interest in addressing these problems, Tanzania still does not have specific laws against elder abuse. Some abuses are covered by criminal law or laws affecting civil rights, property rights, family violence, or mental health. And many older people in Tanzania have low income. It's only 4% of older people who receive monthly pension, and 96% of them are not covered by any social protection scheme. Facts and figures. Older people care for 54% of the 2 million orphans and vulnerable children. Most of these caregivers are women with no reliable income. When there is an unexplained death in the community, older women are accused of witchcraft and are subject to violence in their homes by close members. And cultural taboos restricts the human rights of older women who are also the victims of discrimination. Cultural practices, especially after the death of a spouse. You'll find that most of the properties of a widow is distributed to the nearest male relative after the death of their spouse. Police report in 2016 shows that in 2014, 157 older people were killed. In 2015, 190, and by October 2016, 119 older people were killed, respectively, due to witchcraft allegations. But this shows a trend positive in the reduction of the killings of older people, and this is due to actions which has been taken, we have increased awareness raising using kids club, youth clubs, but also using the media houses, but also we are using the intergenerational linkage. We are establishing kids clubs. We are inviting older people to talk with young people in schools and colleges, but also the government has established a national task force to investigate the causes and prosecute the suspects. But why older people are accused of witchcrafts? It's because of the rent and the property disputes against widows. You find that accusations of witchcrafts are used to force widows to live in their rents as tenants. Family members or neighbors ask traditional healers to make witchcraft accusations against women for financial gains. But also, in our country, we have weak policies and legal framework to deal with witchcrafts-related elderly torture and killings. There is common physical myth about witches, because most of our people in our country think that witches have red eyes. So, and older women, because of their lifestyle, from cooking over smoke stoves or medical conditions like conjunctivitis, we find that they have red eyes. What we are doing actually to address these problems is that we have been doing the lobbying and advocacy to influence policy changes in areas such as rights on universal pension, free medical services, regulation of the national aging policy, including older people in the local government plans and budget. We have also been implementing practical projects to support older people, of which we have been encouraging older people to engage in income generation activities, human rights training, HIV/AIDS impact mitigation, referral and connection with the other service providers. Like those who have legal problems, we always link them with the legal aid service provider. But also we have been bringing older people and young persons together at Kids Club, Senior Citizens Club, at schools to challenge negative attitude toward older people, organizing school competitions such as Easter competition, debate about the challenges facing older people. And what actually we are emphasizing is the enforcement of the aging policy. We are lucky that the government has been listening to us, and of recent, there have been a launch of universal pension scheme for Tanzanians over 60 years in Tanzania Island, which is part of the United Republic of Tanzania. We have started with the 70 years old. It's because of the limited funding. The government has also introduced the property tax exemption for older people in residential housing. There is introduction of free medical services for older people, and some district councils have started locating funds to support older people initiatives. The overall achievement of our organization is that we have trained over 400 older people monitoring groups to track and monitor older people and use evidence for advocacy. We have provided 780 soft loans to women to run income generation activities and the selling second-hand clothes. Cash transfer initiatives have been started in some districts. And also, the area we see that we need improvement is that we need to increase our efforts on advocacy and lobbying to educate political leaders and government officials about human and constitutional rights of older people so that they will provide equitable, responsive services to older people and their dependents. What we are looking ahead is that we need to increase our advocacy and lobbying skills to make sure that Tanzania and other African countries adopt, ratify, and implement the UN Convention on the Rights of Older People and ratification of the AU protocol. But also, I must emphasize that we must empower older people through their organization to engage with the local, national, regional, and global stakeholders to ensure that strategic sustainable development goals, their follow-up and review, integrate the perspective of rights of older people. Thank you. You have been a wonderful audience, and thank you for listening to me. And this is the end of my presentation.
Thank you. And thanks to the entire panel for your very helpful, interesting remarks and for the insights that you shared. We do have some questions, and I thought that what we would do is start with one that's for the panel in general, so that everyone has a chance to express a few words. And that question would be, what has to happen to change the mindset about tapping the talents of older people? What would you suggest? What needs to happen to change the mindset about tapping the talents of older people? So can we start with you, Frank? And we'll work our way down.
Okay, I would say we have to make the good cases visible. So really to show and to prove, like Mark says, thousands of people doing the job already. It's just not visible. It's not on the agenda. So it's pure communication to really work on the age perception.
I'll echo Frank's comments. I've had two specific versions. I think we need a new way to describe people's roles in this period of life. Bob Butler, the famous gerontologist, geriatrician, talked about the elder function as a role that older people could play. But I particularly favor Chip Conley, who's a guy who started a hotel chain and then went to work at Airbnb in his 50s, talks about being a modern elder, in which he was an intern at Airbnb learning a whole new field. At the same time, he was mentoring the founders of the organization. And I love that kind of duality. And at a much broader level, from Frank was talking about the dependency ratio. Why don't we have an abundancy ratio? You know, the dependency ratio is all based around the needs of older people, but I wonder if we could come up with a calculus of the assets of the older population and show how, you know, some countries have a higher abundance ratio. And I think some of these, you know, rethinkings and rephrasings could make a big difference.
To me, I think what is needed is to introduce the intergenerational programs that could bring together older people and young people so that they can change their attitude and their behavior against older people. Because when we involve the youth, they will understand the challenges facing older people. And when they understand, because we know that these young people are the ones who will be in decision-making positions. So when they be planning, making decisions, they'll consider the issues of older people.
Thank you.
I think there needs to be some sort of institutional center and advocacy for this population. You know, if you look at other economic groups, other trends, there's usually some sort of core group that's promoting it, lobbying for it, and to date there really is not this in this area.
And I'll just end this by making a plug for more and better data on older persons to help us better understand the reality of older persons' many roles and contributions to society.
Thank you. We have someone who said they wanted to be sure to say thank you for an amazing group of speakers and for the passion that you have on tapping the talents of older adults. But in addition to the themes that were highlighted, this person is asking about your thoughts on access to health care as people age. How do we promote geriatric care for the aged, knowing that we're going to need a large number of care providers, of geriatricians, with very few people in the actual pipeline. So again, the entire panel doesn't need to answer that, but perhaps, Mark, you'd like to start, and then anyone else who would like to address that?
I'll cede my
You'll
comment.
cede your start? Okay.
In Germany, we are quite lucky because we have a pretty good social security system. So we have a long-term care insurance and health. So we have the system, but we have a lack on caregivers. So I think there's different dimensions. And in the case of Germany, I could say we really need more nurses and professional caregivers, but we have the system still up and running. So maybe a bit out of the ordinary problems in Germany.
Mark, this is one for you. What types of cultural and social innovations can start building, what can we start building now? Are there specific offerings, services, resources that will have an impact immediately? Thank you.
Well, I'm partial to adapting institutions that are already playing these kinds of roles. So, you know, in the talk, I mentioned that idea of higher education playing a new kind of role for people at this juncture. And I think there's I remember my former board chair was one of the founders of Elder Hostel, and he used to recount how much bewilderment he'd get when he talked about the role Elder Hostel could play in the early days. And, you know, a few years later, it was a $200 million a year NGO that had not only, you know, helped millions of people itself, but had triggered a whole revolution in education where all these lifelong learning programs were getting started, and people are actually adjusting their life goals to retire earlier so that they could learn. And so I think that some of these institutions like higher education could really play a critical function. I think there's a great opportunity also for public policy and for financial services. So, you know, one idea is instead of having individual retirement accounts where the retirement is the goal, this kind of disengagement, having individual purpose accounts which could help people spend a year or two transitioning into doing an internship, going back to school, even taking a break. And we've been involved with a project that AARP has led, which is on Social Security innovation. Kind of picks up on something Frank was just mentioning. And one of the ideas we worked on with Deb Whitman from AARP was the idea of being able to take an early year of Social Security to pay for going back to school, to become an entrepreneur, to launch a new chapter, and then you defer your full eligibility for Social Security at a, you know, an actuarially adjusted period later. So I think that there's this whole realm of creativity that we can start tapping, but we're not yet trying to do that.
Thank you, Mark. And Ed, this one is for you. How can young people connect to senior entrepreneurs to create social impact? Is there a platform to support the connection?
Not that I know of, but I do think that this trend towards co-working spaces, towards shared office spaces, is a really good way for people to create these entrepreneurial teams, for younger entrepreneurs to look for older entrepreneurs who can give them some mentoring and experience, for older entrepreneurs to find someone who can add the tech component perhaps, or the social media component, and to become a partner and sort of deal with succession issues. So I do think this trend towards working in close proximity with other entrepreneurs will have a positive effect on this issue.
Thank you. And this one is for Frank Livingstone, and they said I could even weigh in if I wanted to. Are you aware of programs outside the U.S. that engage older adults in volunteer work? In Germany, who would organize the older volunteers? In Africa, we know there's many intergenerational activities that occur, so how do we go about that? So are you aware of programs outside the U.S. that engage older adults with volunteer work?
Well, there are two types, so to say. There are organizations that are totally ageless, so they don't care in a good manner. How old are you? You just reach out to everybody. They don't have a limit. And there are some programs and some foundations who are working to empower the culture of working with seniors specifically. But I don't think there is a dedicated senior group or so. It's more integrated in the normal programs that I prefer, because I think it's, as Mark said, Sun City is not a good idea. If you have the senior and volunteer corps and the junior, so why don't we have just an intergenerational corps?
Thank you. I know of the VSO, Overseas Volunteers Organization in UK, have been sending volunteers in Africa, and our organization, we have received more than 4 volunteers who have been volunteering at our office since 1995 to date.
I did need to comment when you mentioned Sun Cities that some of the work that we've done with other countries included a while when several years ago the Netherlands had a countrywide initiative to make the Netherlands an age-friendly country. And I remember when one of my colleagues called me one day from the Netherlands and he said, "Donna, I'm so upset. They want to build a Sun City in the Netherlands. Don't they realize we have no sun?" Yes, please.
I just maybe would like to add that there was a project from Wikipedia Germany to really work with seniors to become authors of Wikipedia. And I think in each and every country we should ensure that Wikipedia get pressure from senior groups to invite them, to train them to become an author, because we lose so many knowledge each and every day when seniors die. So it's really important for us to work with Wikipedia to get all the knowledge somewhere stored.
Thank you. And I would just add that at the Generations United Biennial International Conference, we had last year about 12 countries represented and many academic groups, as well as, for example, the government of Singapore, as Mark was mentioning, are engaging in intergenerational activity. And the important thing is that we weave that together. And I know there's an effort here at the UN to start an intergenerational committee, so I would encourage you to look at that. So we would have the family, children, youth, and aging focal points able to work together and promote a shared agenda. So as we're coming to a close today, what I wanted to do was to ask the panelists to take just one last minute or 30 seconds each and make any last comment that you would like to make in closing. And brief is always good.
Just one simple thing, just do it. I mean, we talk a lot, we get a lot of inspiration, I hope, so I think each of you have to get an idea how you can use it in your own field. And people are willing to participate, seniors are waiting to be more active, so it's time to go.
Why don't we go back? Sarah?
I just want to reiterate my thanks for being able to come to this very important event and to use this opportunity to launch our highlights publication. I hope that if the data and materials are useful to you, that you will visit the website of the Population Division and utilize the resources we have there. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Mark.
I want to say, this can sound daunting, and the stepping into the future can sound a distant future, but in a lot of ways, it's just doing something that's natural, that used to happen all the time, and that we worked heroically to undo. And as I've been going around the world, I feel like it's almost, this is a kind of progressive nostalgia, finding new ways to do old things, adapting things that really worked in the past and bringing the generations together in productive roles by older people, but in ways that fit our, crazy modern family world. But I think that instead of trying to fight against something, we're actually trying to return to something that goes with the grain of humanity.
Thank you. Ed?
I'm very impressed that this event is going on. About 10 years ago, which I'm not plugging this, but I wrote a book on senior entrepreneurship, and I got no attention for it whatsoever. In fact, AARP wouldn't even review it. And really, I've been sort of in a state of depression about the subject for a long time. But over the last couple of years, I see it's getting much, more and more attention, which I think is fantastic. So I think it's really a positive trend here, and the fact that this is organized and that it includes business activities of these populations is all for the better. And I think, this is just going to get more and more attention as it goes along.
Thank you. Livingstone?
One point I would like to make is that we need to speed up the UN Convention for the Rights of Older People and the AU protocol ratified in order to realize the strategic development goal principle of leaving no one behind.
Thank you. And I would just add, given that this has been a fabulous session where there have been many films recommended, from The Intern to The Most Exotic Marigold Hotel, one of the things we recommended in a report we did recently was we said you can change your government, you can change this, you can change that, but the most important thing you can do is make sure you have a friend that is younger than you and a friend that's older than you. And so I'd like to encourage everyone to grab that younger or older friend and go see a film that just came out called Victoria and Abdul. And if you're familiar with it, it's Judi Dench, who is in her 80s playing Queen Victoria at the end of her life, and she befriends a young Indian servant. And what's wonderful is that she is the pupil and he is her teacher. And the energy, the excitement about life, the spirit that comes through in that relationship is absolutely fabulous. It really demonstrates what we know about the importance of generational connections, which is that they benefit all of us. So please join me in thanking our panel today.
Thank you, panelists, for a very stimulating conversation. Okay. Now I would like to introduce Lydia Dravek, Vice Chair of the General Assembly's 8th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. In addition to this important position, Ms. Dravek also serves as the human rights expert at the Slovenian mission to the United Nations. Before coming to New York, she worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Slovenia, covering humanitarian assistance and international development cooperation issues. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Lydia Dravek.
Thank you very much. I have to admit, when the organizers first invited me to deliver on behalf of the Open-Ended Working Group's few remarks during this closing session, also in a way summarizing a little bit today's discussion, of course I felt very honored, but the moment of pride was quickly replaced by a moment of panic. How exactly to summarize this rich discussion today? The sheer volume of information presented here. In only a few minutes, I'm actually given to deliver this statement. What is more important and what should be re-mentioned again? To me, everything or most of the issues raised today are important. They are part of my future and they're already reality for my parents and for my grandparents. About halfway through this discussion, I realized this in many ways feels like a follow-up or even an addition to the discussions we had in July at the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. So what I'm going to do is to also briefly summarize the last session for you, and you'll quickly notice similarities between both discussions. To me, personally, this is encouraging. It shows that there is a wide recognition and common understanding about the positive contributions older persons can bring, as well as challenges they are facing in their daily lives. Looking for solutions to overcome these problems and challenges, and with that enabling older persons to really tap into their talents and contribute fully to society, will not only enable older persons to step into their future, but also whole societies and especially younger generations to address challenging questions of today. The human experience, the accumulated wisdom, and the unique perspective of older people can be a key and a unique lens through which younger generations can view their own lives and together look for solutions to today's unique and global challenges. So I'm happy to report that at the 8th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, we also had rich discussions on how to enhance the contributions of older persons to social development, but we also addressed issues such as equality and non-discrimination, and violence, neglect, and abuse. Due to limited time still remaining for this event, I'm not going to go into details of these discussions, but I would encourage you all to visit the website of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, and where you can find more information on the discussions that took place. Let me just point out a few general observations, also reflected in the chair's summary. of the session, but most importantly, you'll notice similarities with today's discussion. Many delegations in the working group recognize the importance of considering older persons as an active group, which can make significant contribution to social development, as long as certain guarantees are in place to allow for their full participation in society. Older persons were identified as both agents and beneficiaries of change, and in that sense, delegations made reference to the need to fully empower older persons as a means to allow and promote their full participation and contribution to sustainable development. On the interactive discussion on equality and non-discrimination, delegations talked also about structural ageism and prejudice against older persons and how it is perceived in society, in law, in policies and in practice, and leads to exclusion and discrimination of older persons. In the discussion on violence, neglect and abuse against older persons, it was made evident by the delegations and panelists that this phenomenon can take many forms, from physical and financial to psychological, social, sexual abuse, etc., and can take place in different settings. Many delegations also refer to the case of violence against older women who suffer from multiple and intersecting forms of violence and discriminations, as we also heard today here. Within both discussions, delegations addressed pros and cons of a possible new legally binding instrument. So, as you can see, and it was also evident here today, there are still many questions to be answered and many issues to be discussed in the open-ended working group on aging. So what are the next steps for the working group? The working group will continue to have focused discussions at its next session in 2018. As was proposed by the chair during the 8th session, the next session will hold discussion on autonomy and independence and long-term and palliative care. So, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the chair of the open-ended working group on aging, permanent representative of Argentina to United Nations here in New York, and the whole bureau, allow me to express our gratitude and appreciation for the support of delegations, the UN system, and the civil society for the work of the working group and for their substantive contributions. We look forward to your continuing participation in the work of the open-ended working group on aging and look forward to greet you at the next session in 2018. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Dravik, for a very stimulating remark. Now I'd like to introduce Rosemary Lane, who is the Senior Social Affairs Officer at UNDESA and the UN Focal Point on Aging. Previously, she served in the Department of Technical Cooperation for Development and the UN Drug Control Program in Vienna. She focused on aging issues after that for a number of years and served as a member of the Secretariat for the Second World Assembly on Aging in 2002. She was the principal contributor to the drafting of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, or called MIPA, which was adopted in 2002. She also promoted the implementation of the Plan of Action on a national level and the provision of technical assistance to member states. Working across the UN system, she has also championed the inclusion of age perspective in relevant policy areas and supports the open-ended working group on aging as a way of strengthening the protection of the human rights of older persons. Please join me in welcoming Rosemary Lane.
Thank you very much. I think my remarks will probably be shorter than my introduction because I'm also going to close the program. So I want to thank all of our speakers for very stimulating discussions today, presentations and discussions. And for me, it served as a reminder to actually hear examples of, and a reminder of what older people are actually doing as entrepreneurs. We often talk at the UN about how we're going to enhance the contributions of older people, but it serves as a reminder that many older people are already contributing. And so our job is how to enact policies or help governments discuss how they will enact policies to take advantage of the skills of older people more fully. And it was a very stimulating discussion. I would just really like to thank the NGO Committee on Aging. In the words of the ASG for UN Women, it's headed by a bunch of radical women, I think, and some men, but a lot of radical women. And with the UN Program on Aging, we're very thankful to them for the many years that they've really put this event together. It takes many months of work. They do work with our office, but they do an incredible amount of work each year to put this event together. I always say that colleagues in my division who work on other social groups are very jealous because we have such a very well-organized NGO committee on aging that does this and does a huge amount of work for us. So thank you very much. And with that, I would like to close the program for this year. And I know that in about 3 months, they'll be knocking on our door and we'll be discussing the program for next year. So thank you very much. And thank you for everybody who attended the event today. Thank you.
Okay. On behalf of Sandy and myself, I'd like to thank the following people for contributions to the 2017 UN IDOP Celebration of Older Persons. We'd like to thank all of our wonderful speakers, our 3 panelists, our keynote speaker, Sarah Hertog, Rosemary Lane, and Lydia Dravik, our moderator, Donna Butts, Janet Siegel, the chair of the NGO Committee on Aging, the UN IDOP Planning Committee, all of the volunteers and interns. And now I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Sandy Timmerman.
So I'll add my quick thanks. And I have 2 announcements to make. We have a reception immediately following the program, and many of you have signed up for that. There's still an opportunity, if you're interested in going, to attend it. It will be held in a beautiful room overlooking the skyline of New York at the AARP offices. It is a fundraising reception. So if you are interested in coming, those of you who haven't registered, just bring a check for $65 and we'd be very happy to have you join us to help support the work of the NGO Committee on Aging. And then my second announcement is that we have some people who have mobility issues, and for a smoother exit, we'd like you, if you would wish, to stay near the door and we'll escort you out. And for all the other people, please leave the way you came, which is upstairs through the other floor and the other entrance. So I want to thank you also for coming. I think it's been a great program, and I think we are inspired, at least I am, to make the future now and do something, as Mark said, that's a natural inclination for us in our later years to really make a difference in our communities and with our future generations. So thank you very much.